Dust whirled across the sun-baked courthouse steps as Delilah Hayes clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, tears streaming silently down her face in the harsh Dakota Territory sun of 1875. The last hope for her father's freedom had just been crushed beneath Judge Wilson's gavel, a $500 fine that might as well have been $5 million for a family who'd lost everything in last season's drought. "You have until sundown tomorrow to produce the funds, Miss Hayes," the bailiff had told her with practiced indifference. "Otherwise, your father serves 3 years in territorial prison. 3 years. Her father wouldn't survive 3 months of hard labor, not with his bad lung and failing heart." Delilah sank onto the bottom step, her body trembling with silent sobs as townspeople streamed past, careful to avoid looking at her directly. In Cottonwood Springs, poverty was treated like a disease one might catch through eye contact. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep and gentle, tinged with a slight drawl that marked him as not quite local. Delilah looked up through tear-blurred vision to see a tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. When she wiped her eyes, the man came into focus, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, wearing a trail-worn duster and a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His face was tanned and weathered, but kind, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. "I'm fine," she lied, attempting to rise on shaky legs. "Please just let me be." The stranger didn't move. Instead, he removed his hat, revealing thick chestnut hair streaked with gold from long days under the sun. "Name's Ronan Blackwood," he said, offering no handshake, respecting her space. "And begging your pardon, miss, but you don't look fine at all." Delilah shook her head, too tired and heartsick to maintain pretenses. "My father's been fined $500 for a crime he didn't commit. If I don't pay by tomorrow sundown, he goes to prison." Her voice cracked. "And I have exactly $3.27 to my name." Ronan Blackwood studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful beneath the brim of his hat. Without a word, he turned and walked up the courthouse steps, disappearing through the heavy wooden doors. Delilah remained frozen, confused by the stranger's abrupt departure. She rose to her feet, brushing dust from her skirts, and prepared to begin the long walk back to their small homestead outside of town. What was she going to tell her younger siblings? That their father would be gone for 3 years. That they'd likely lose their land while he was away. Lost in her desperate thoughts, she didn't notice when the courthouse doors opened again 10 minutes later. Ronan Blackwood descended the steps, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hayes." He called, stopping her before she could leave the town square. She turned, wondering how he knew her name. "Your father's fine has been paid in full," he said simply. "They're processing his release papers now." Delilah stared at him, uncomprehending. "What? How?" "Who would?" And then understanding dawned, leaving her speechless. "You, but why? You don't even know us." Ronan shrugged, his eyes never leaving her face. Sometimes a man just knows the right thing when he sees it. The enormity of what he'd done crashed over Delilah in waves. Her knees buckled beneath her, and suddenly strong arms were around her, holding her upright as sobs racked her body. She clutched at the stranger's duster, years of pride and independence dissolving in the face of this unexpected kindness. "It's all right," Ronan murmured, his voice rumbling against her ear as he held her. "It's going to be all right now." And there, on the dusty street of Cottonwood Springs, with curious onlookers watching from storefronts and wagon seats, Delilah Hayes cried in the arms of a cowboy she'd never seen before today, a man who'd just changed everything with a gesture she couldn't begin to understand. Delilah's father, Thomas Hayes, emerged from the courthouse looking pale and confused, his weathered hands still bearing the manacle marks from his 3 days in the town jail. His eyes widened at the sight of his daughter in the arms of a stranger, Delilah. He called, his voice raspy from disuse. "What's happening here?" She pulled away from Ronan, wiping her tears hastily before rushing to her father. "Papa, you're free." She embraced him tightly, feeling the familiar scratchiness of his cotton shirt against her cheek. "This man, Mr. Blackwood, he paid your fine." Thomas Hayes stared over his daughter's shoulder at the tall cowboy. "Why would you do such a thing, mister? That's a small fortune." Ronan replaced his hat, adjusting it with a slight tug. Judge Wilson explained the circumstances. Seemed to me a man shouldn't lose 3 years of his life for defending his water rights. The Hayes family honors its debts, Thomas said stiffly, his pride clearly wounded. I don't know how, but I'll pay you back every cent. No need for that right now, Ronan replied easily. I'm heading north with a herd to Montana Territory. I'll be passing back through these parts in about 3 months. We can settle up then, if you're still of a mind to. Delilah watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. Men like Ronan Blackwood, trail bosses with money to spare, didn't typically ride into small towns dispensing charity. There had to be something more to his story. At least come to supper, she offered impulsively. Let us thank you properly before you ride on. A smile touched the corners of Ronan's mouth. That's mighty kind, Miss Hayes. I'd be honored. The ride back to the Hayes homestead was quiet, with Delilah and her father sharing the bench of their ancient wagon while Ronan followed on his dappled gray gelding. Delilah kept stealing glances at the cowboy, trying to puzzle him out. He rode tall in the saddle, scanning the horizon with the vigilance of a man accustomed to trouble. The holster at his hip held a well-worn Colt, and she noticed a Winchester rifle secured to his saddle. He's no ordinary cowhand, Thomas muttered, following her gaze. Man carries himself like he's seen his share of fights. He saved you from prison, Papa, Delilah reminded him. Whatever else he might be, he did us a kindness today. Thomas nodded slowly. That he did. But kindness usually comes with a price in these parts. The Hayes homestead came into view as they crested a small rise, 40 acres of stubbornly tilled earth with a modest 2-room cabin, a barn in need of repair, and a chicken coop that leaned precipitously to one side. It wasn't much, but they'd carved it from the wilderness with their own hands after moving west from Pennsylvania 5 years earlier. 2 children burst from the cabin door as the wagon approached. Daniel, 12 and all gangly limbs, and Sarah, 10 with her mother's golden curls, raced toward them shouting with excitement. Papa, you're home! They flung themselves at Thomas as he climbed stiffly from the wagon. Easy there, little ones, he laughed, gathering them close. Your old pa's a bit sore from those jail benches. Sarah peeked around her father, eyeing Ronan with undisguised curiosity. Who's that? She asked loudly. That's Mr. Blackwood, Delilah explained, climbing down from the wagon. He helped Papa with a problem in town. He'll be joining us for supper. Daniel stared openly at Ronan's gun belt. Are you a gunslinger, Mr. Daniel? Delilah scolded. Ronan dismounted with fluid grace, securing his horse to the hitching post. I'm a cattleman's son. The gun's just a tool like your pa's plow. Thomas ushered the children toward the house. Go help your sister with the meal, and mind your manners with our guest. Inside the cabin, Delilah worked efficiently at the cook stove, acutely aware of Ronan's presence at their rough-hewn table. The cabin's main room served as kitchen, dining room, and living area, with 2 small bedrooms partitioned off by cotton curtains. Everything was clean but worn, the furniture handmade, the dishes mismatched, the windows patched with oilcloth where glass had cracked. It's not much, she said apologetically as she served a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread. It's a home, Ronan replied, his eyes taking in the dried flowers hanging from the ceiling beams, the carefully mended quilt draped over the single armchair, the shelf of precious books. That's more than many can claim. As they ate, Thomas gradually drew Ronan into conversation about his cattle drive, and Delilah found herself listening intently. Ronan spoke of driving 3,000 head of longhorns north to the railroad in Miles City, of dealing with rustlers and river crossings, of the changing cattle business as more settlers moved west. The open range won't last forever, Ronan predicted. Another 10 years, maybe less, and it'll all be fenced in. Is that why you paid Papa's fine? Daniel asked suddenly. Because you need our land for your cattle, Daniel, Delilah and Thomas exclaimed simultaneously, but Ronan didn't appear offended. He looked at the boy steadily. No, son. I paid your pa's fine because I've seen too many good men lose everything over water disputes with powerful neighbors. Judge Wilson told me about the situation with Henry Caldwell damming up your creek. Thomas's face darkened at the mention of their wealthy neighbor. Caldwell claims the water rights belong to him now. When I tried to break his dam to water our crops, his men caught me, said I was trespassing and destroying property. The law's often on the side of men with money, Ronan observed, but that doesn't make it right. After supper, while Thomas sat with the children by the fireplace telling stories of his youth in Pennsylvania, Delilah and Ronan stepped outside onto the small porch. The prairie stretched before them, bathed in the deep purple light of dusk. In the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus. "Thank you," Delilah said quietly, "not just for the money, but for bringing him home to us. I don't know what we would have done if," her voice caught. "You would have found a way," Ronan said with certainty. "You strike me as a woman who doesn't give up easily." She smiled slightly. "Is that a compliment or an observation?" "Both, I reckon." He leaned against the porch rail, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "How long has your mother been gone?" The question surprised her. 3 years. Influenza took her the winter after Sarah turned 7. How did you know? "The way you run this household, the way your father looks to you before he speaks." He glanced at her. "I recognize the signs, lost my own mother young." Delilah felt an unexpected connection to this stranger, a shared understanding that needed no elaboration. "Will you really come back through here?" she asked, changing the subject. "After your cattle drive," I said I would. His eyes held hers. "I'm a man of my word, Miss Hayes." "Delilah," she corrected him. "If you're going to save my family from ruin, you might as well use my given name." His smile transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "Delilah, then, and I'm Ronan." The following morning, Ronan Blackwood rode out at dawn, declining offers to stay another day. He had men and cattle waiting for him north of town, he explained, and every day of delay cost money. But before leaving, he pressed a small leather pouch into Thomas Hayes's hand. "A loan," he insisted when Thomas tried to refuse. "Enough to see you through until harvest. You can add it to what you already owe me." Delilah watched him ride away, a strange emptiness forming in her chest as his figure grew smaller against the horizon. She told herself it was merely gratitude, she felt nothing more. But that night, and for many nights after, her dreams were filled with blue eyes and a gentle voice saying, "It's going to be all right now." The weeks after Ronan's departure passed in a blur of endless work. Without rain, their crops struggled, requiring constant attention to conserve what little moisture remained in the soil. The dispute with Henry Caldwell over water rights remained unresolved, forcing Thomas to make pre-dawn journeys to a more distant creek to haul water for their livestock and garden. By mid-July, with temperatures soaring, disaster struck again. Thomas collapsed while repairing the barn roof, the combination of heat and his weakened condition from jail proving too much for his system. The local doctor diagnosed a heart ailment, prescribing rest and cool compresses, luxuries a frontier family could ill afford. "Someone has to run this farm," Thomas argued from his sick. "The children are too young and you can't do everything yourself, Delilah." "I'll manage," she insisted, though privately she wondered how. The wheat needed harvesting, the livestock tending, the garden saving from the relentless sun. And all the while, Henry Caldwell's men watched from their property line, like vultures waiting for the Hayes family to fail so they could swoop in and claim the land. On the third night after her father's collapse, Delilah sat at the kitchen table long after the children were asleep, calculating figures in a worn ledger. Even with Ronan's loan, they couldn't last past September without a successful harvest. And with Thomas bedridden, harvesting the wheat field alone would take her weeks' time they didn't have. A sound outside drew her attention, the unmistakable approach of horses. Fear prickled along her spine. Nighttime visitors rarely brought good news. Delilah reached for the shotgun her father kept loaded by the door, moving silently to the window. Through the glass, she could make out 3 mounted figures in the moonlight, stopped at the edge of their property. One dismounted and approached the house alone, hands visible at his sides in a gesture of peace. As the figure drew closer, the moonlight revealed a familiar silhouette that made her heart leap strangely in her chest. Ronan Blackwood. Delilah flung open the door before he could knock, nearly startling him. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. His eyes took in the shotgun in her hands, and one eyebrow rose slightly. "Expecting trouble, always," she admitted, lowering the weapon. "These days especially." Ronan glanced back at his companions, giving them a signal to make camp where they were. Then he turned back to Delilah, his expression sobering as he noticed the strain on her face. "What's happened?" In the soft lamplight of the kitchen, Delilah explained her father's condition and their precarious situation. Ronan listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly troubled. "And Caldwell's men, they've been watching the property," she nodded wearily. "They know we're vulnerable. Papa says Caldwell's wanted our land since we arrived. It connects his northern and southern pastures. With the water dispute and now this." She trailed off, the weight of their circumstances momentarily overwhelming. Ronan's jaw tightened. "Where's your wheat field?" "The north section, about 15 acres. Why?" He rose from the table. "I need to see it, first light tomorrow. But your cattle drive, we delivered early, got a good price too." His eyes met hers. "I said I'd be back in 3 months. It's been 2.5. Delilah felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "I didn't think," she stopped herself. "I'm glad you've returned safely." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes. "Get some rest, Delilah. Tomorrow we'll figure things out." She watched from the porch as he walked back to his men, his tall figure cutting a sharp silhouette against the star-filled sky. For the first time in weeks, the knot of worry in her stomach began to loosen. Morning brought the explanation for Ronan's interest in their wheat field. After a quick inspection in the early dawn light, he returned to the house where Delilah was preparing breakfast. "Your wheat's ready to harvest," he announced without preamble, "and it looks to be a decent yield despite the drought." "Yes, but my men and I can have it cut, bundled, and threshed in 3 days." Delilah nearly dropped the coffee pot. 3 days, that's impossible. Even with Papa and all of us working, it would take 2 weeks at least. "We've got 8 experienced hands, good horses, and proper equipment," Ronan replied, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Travis and Wilson are riding into town now to rent a mechanical reaper from the mercantile. We can't afford, it's covered," he said firmly. "Consider it part of our arrangement." Delilah set down her cup with more force than necessary. "And what arrangement is that exactly? You keep spending money on my family with no clear expectation of repayment." "Why?" Ronan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Your father's a good man caught in bad circumstances. I know something about that." "There must be more to it," she insisted. A shadow crossed his face. "There is, but that's a story for another time." He glanced toward the bedroom where Thomas was resting. "Your father needs to focus on recovery now. Let me handle the harvest." Before she could argue further, he was gone, striding toward his men who were already setting up a camp near the wheat field. Over the next 3 days, Delilah watched in amazement as Ronan's crew transformed their struggling homestead into a hive of efficient activity. The mechanical reaper cut wide swaths through the golden wheat, while men followed behind, binding the stalks into neat bundles. Others constructed a temporary threshing floor where the grain was separated from the chaff. By the second day, curious neighbors had arrived to witness the unusual sight. By the third, several had offered their own labor in exchange for Ronan's help with their fields afterward. What began as a rescue mission for one family became a community harvest that would benefit 6 struggling homesteads. Throughout it all, Ronan moved with the natural authority of a man accustomed to command, directing his men, negotiating with neighbors, and somehow finding moments to check on Delilah and her family. Each time their paths crossed, Delilah felt increasingly drawn to his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. On the evening of the 3rd day, with the harvest complete and the grain safely stored, the Hayes family hosted an impromptu celebration. Neighbors brought food and drink, musicians produced fiddles and harmonicas, and for a few hours, the hardships of frontier life gave way to community and joy. Delilah found herself watching Ronan as he conversed easily with local farmers, respectfully declined the flirtations of several unmarried women, and patiently taught Daniel how to properly whittle a stick with a pocket knife. He belonged nowhere and everywhere at once, a mysterious figure who somehow fit seamlessly into their world. As the party wound down and neighbors departed, Delilah walked to the edge of the property where Ronan stood gazing at the stars, a little apart from the revelry. "You've transformed everything," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Not just the harvest, but the whole community. People around here haven't worked together like this in years." Ronan looked down at her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes folks just need reminding that they're stronger together than apart." "Is that what you do? Travel around reminding people of their better nature?" His laugh was sudden and warm. "Hardly. I'm just a cattleman trying to stay ahead of the railroads and land speculators." "A cattleman who carries enough money to pay substantial fines and finance community harvests," she observed. "There's more to your story, Ronan Blackwood." The amusement faded from his eyes, replaced by something more complex. There always is. A comfortable silence fell between them as they gazed at the prairie stretched out before them, silvered by moonlight. "How long will you stay?" Delilah finally asked, the question that had been hovering in her mind for days. "A week, maybe 2. "Long enough to help your neighbors with their harvests as promised." He glanced at her. "Long enough to make sure you and your family are settled. And then I head south to Texas. I've got a ranch there that needs attention before winter." The revelation surprised her. "You own a ranch." "I thought that I was just a hired trail boss." His smile held a hint of self-deprecation. "I started that way, worked cattle since I was 14, saved every penny, bought my first herd 7 years ago, my land 3 years after that." Delilah studied his profile, seeing him with new eyes. "You're a businessman then?" "I'm a man who believes in building something that lasts," he corrected gently. "The cattle business is changing. The smart money's in breeding better stock on established ranches, not just driving longhorns to market." She was struck by the passion in his voice when he spoke of his vision. This was no drifting cowhand, but a man with plans and dreams, a man rooted somewhere far from Dakota Territory. "Texas is a long way from here," she said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. Ronan turned to face her fully, his expression suddenly intent. "Distance is relative in this country. 7 days by train, less if you push it." "Is that an observation or an invitation?" she asked, echoing their conversation from weeks before. His eyes held hers. "That depends on what you want it to be, Delilah Hayes." Before she could respond, Daniel's voice called from the house, breaking the moment between them. "Delilah, Papa's asking for you." She took a step back, suddenly conscious of how close they had been standing. "I should go." Ronan nodded, his expression unreadable once more. "We'll talk again." As promised, Ronan and his men stayed for nearly 2 weeks, helping neighboring farms with their harvests and becoming temporary fixtures in the community. Thomas Hayes's health improved steadily, allowing him to sit on the porch and direct operations from a distance, his pride somewhat salved by this compromise between rest and work. With each passing day, Delilah found herself increasingly drawn to Ronan. They shared coffee at dawn before the day's work began, talked on the porch in the evenings after the children were asleep, and worked side by side preparing meals for the harvest crews. In those quiet moments, they exchanged stories of their lives, she of her childhood in Pennsylvania and the difficult journey west. He of growing up on a struggling Texas farm, losing his parents young, and making his own way in the cattle business. What began as curiosity deepened into understanding, and understanding into something neither was quite ready to name. On the morning Ronan announced they would be leaving the following day, Delilah felt a hollowness open inside her. She hid it well, thanking him politely for all he'd done and wishing him safe travels. That evening, Thomas Hayes called Ronan into his bedroom for a private conversation that lasted nearly an hour. When Ronan emerged, his expression was uncharacteristically solemn, and he avoided Delilah's questioning glance. "What did Papa want?" she asked when she finally cornered him alone on the porch after supper. Ronan leaned against the railing, his eyes on the horizon where the setting sun painted the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "He wanted to discuss our financial arrangement. Did he offer to repay you? Because we can, you know. The wheat harvest will bring enough to." He offered something else entirely, Ronan interrupted, his voice strangely tight. Something I refused. A chill ran through Delilah despite the warm evening. What do you mean? Ronan turned to face her, conflict evident in his eyes. Your father offered to clear the debt if I would marry you and take you to Texas. Delilah felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. He what? He believes I'm a man of means who could provide for you and eventually the children as well. He's concerned about what will happen to all of you if his health fails completely. Ronan's expression softened at the shock on her face. I told him that's not how I conduct business or personal relationships. Humiliation burned through her. I had no idea he would suggest such a thing. I know, Ronan said gently. And I made it clear that while I admire you greatly, I wouldn't agree to such an arrangement. No one should be traded to settle a debt. Relief mingled with a strange disappointment in her chest. Thank you for refusing. Don't thank me for basic decency. He hesitated, then added, but I did make him a counter-offer. Which was, I proposed a business partnership. I'll provide capital to improve the farm, better equipment, drought-resistant seed, maybe even a proper irrigation system to bypass Caldwell's dam. In return, I'll take a percentage of future harvests. His eyes held hers. It's a legitimate arrangement, one that benefits us both. Your family keeps their independence and I gain a northern foothold for my operations. Delilah studied him, searching for the catch, and that's all. A simple business arrangement, something flickered in his expression. That's all I offered your father. The careful phrasing wasn't lost on her. And what would you offer me if asked directly? Ronan took a step closer, his voice dropping. I'd offer to write to you from Texas. To return next spring to check on my investment, to see where time and distance and words on paper might lead us. His eyes never left hers. I'd offer the chance to know each other properly without debts or obligations clouding the picture. Delilah's heart thundered in her chest. That sounds reasonable. I'm occasionally capable of reason, he said with the hint of a smile, though less so when you look at me like that. Heat rushed to her cheeks. Like what? Like you might miss me when I'm gone. The honesty of his observation stripped away her last defenses. I will, she admitted softly. More than is sensible after knowing someone such a short time. Ronan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gentle touch sent a shiver through her. Time is measured differently out here, he murmured. Days can feel like months when you're working side by side, facing hardships together. Is that why you helped us? Because time moves differently in the West, his hand dropped to his side. I helped you because I couldn't walk away. Not from you crying on those courthouse steps, not from your family's struggle, not from… He paused, searching for words. Not from the feeling that I was exactly where I needed to be for the first time in years. The raw honesty of his confession left her speechless. In the lengthening shadows of twilight, with cicadas beginning their nightly chorus around them, Delilah made a decision. She stepped forward and placed her hand lightly on his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken beneath her palm. Write to me from Texas, she said softly. Come back in the spring. Let's discover what might grow between us, given time and care. Ronan covered her hand with his own, his eyes darkening with emotion. I'll write every week. And I'll answer, she promised. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to turn away. Instead, she rose to meet him, and their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle yet full of promise, like seeds planted in spring with the faith that summer would come. When they parted, something had shifted between them, an unspoken understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. Whatever grew from this moment would be their choice, freely given, not born from obligation or gratitude. Ronan left the following morning as planned, but not before finalizing the partnership agreement with Thomas and leaving detailed plans for farm improvements to be implemented before winter. His departure lacked the finality Delilah had dreaded. It felt instead like the turning of a page rather than the closing of a book. True to his word, Ronan's first letter arrived 3 weeks later, carried by the twice-monthly mail coach that served their remote area. Delilah read it by lamplight after the children were asleep, savoring his descriptions of the journey south, the changing landscape, the characters encountered along the way. His writing was straightforward yet thoughtful, much like the man himself. She wrote back immediately. filling pages with news of the farm, the children's antics, the ongoing tensions with Henry Caldwell, and the quiet transformation of her feelings from gratitude to something deeper and more complex. As autumn painted the prairie in russet and gold, more letters passed between Dakota Territory and Texas. Delilah found herself living for those envelopes, each one revealing another layer of the man who had ridden into their lives on a summer day and changed everything. In October, Ronan sent a formal invitation. "Would you consider spending the Christmas season in Texas as my guest? Your father and siblings would be most welcome. My home is modest but comfortable, and the winter journey would be easier than a spring one when rivers run high. I've enclosed train tickets and sufficient funds for travel expenses. Say yes." Thomas, showing remarkable improvement in his health, studied his daughter's face as she read the letter aloud at the breakfast table. "You should go," he said simply, "even if the children and I stay behind." "I couldn't leave you all for Christmas," she protested. "You've never left us at all," he reminded her gently. "Not once in 5 years, not even after your mother passed. Perhaps it's time you did." Daniel looked up from his porridge. "We could manage the farm, Pa and me. I'm nearly 13 now." Sarah nodded eagerly. "I can do all the cooking. I've been watching Delilah." Looking at their earnest faces, Delilah felt a tightness in her throat. When had her little siblings grown so capable, so willing to stand on their own? When had her father begun to see her as a woman with her own life to live, rather than just the family's caretaker? "I'll think about it," she promised, though in her heart, the decision was already made. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in early November. By the time Delilah boarded the eastbound train that would connect her to the southern line, the prairie was blanketed in white. She watched from the window as her family grew smaller on the platform, waving until they disappeared from sight. It was her first journey alone, and despite her 23 years, she felt like a girl again, nervous, excited, uncertain of what awaited her. 6 days of travel lay ahead, with changes in Omaha and Kansas City before the final leg to Austin. The journey passed in a blur of changing landscapes and fellow travelers. Delilah watched the snow-covered plains give way to rolling hills and eventually the vast, open spaces of Texas, so different from the intimate confines of her Dakota home. She wrote in her journal each night, capturing impressions and emotions to share with her family upon return. When the train finally pulled into Austin Station on a mild December afternoon, Delilah's heart pounded with anticipation. She peered through the window, searching the platform for a familiar figure. And there he was, Ronan Blackwood, standing tall among the waiting crowd, looking somehow both the same and different. He'd traded his trail clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and new boots, but his stance was unmistakable, as was the way his eyes scanned each face that emerged from the train. When he spotted her, his entire expression transformed. The reserved cattleman vanished, replaced by a man whose joy was written plainly across his features. He moved through the crowd with purpose, reaching the steps just as she descended. "You came," he said simply, as if her presence was a gift he hadn't dared expect. "I said I would," she replied, suddenly shy despite months of intimate correspondence. He took her carpetbag, offering his arm with a formality that made her smile. "My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from here. I've arranged for us to stay in town tonight so you can rest from your journey. We'll head out tomorrow, if that suits you." As they walked through the bustling streets of Austin, Delilah was acutely aware of the curious glances they attracted the tall, well-known rancher and his northern visitor. Ronan seemed oblivious to the attention, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the city's growth since Texas had rejoined the Union. The hotel he'd chosen was modest but well-appointed, with a small restaurant where they dined that evening. Over a meal far more elaborate than anything available in Cottonwood Springs, they rediscovered the easy conversation of their letters, though now enhanced by shared glances and the occasional brush of hands across the table. "Are you nervous about visiting the ranch?" Ronan asked as they lingered over coffee. "A little," she admitted. "It's one thing to exchange letters, but quite another to step into your world completely." He studied her thoughtfully. If it's any comfort, I'm a bit nervous myself. I want you to like it there." The simple confession touched her deeply. This successful, confident man cared what she thought of his home. "Tell me about it," she encouraged. "Help me picture where we're going." His face brightened as he described the property: 5,000 acres of rolling grassland with stands of oak and mesquite, watered by a year-round creek. The main house was stone and timber, built 10 years earlier by the previous owner, with 4 bedrooms and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. A bunkhouse housed the permanent hands, with additional quarters for seasonal workers during roundups and branding. "It's not grand," he emphasized, "but it's solid, built to last." "Like its owner," she observed with a smile. A flush colored his cheekbones. "I'm still building, still learning. The rocking bee is a work in progress. The best things usually are." Their gazes held across the table, and Delilah felt the shift between them, the gradual transformation from cautious friendship to something deeper, something with roots and possibilities. The journey to the Rocking Bee Ranch the following day revealed the Texas that Ronan loved: expansive skies, rolling terrain, and the promise of land that responded to careful stewardship. As their wagon crested a final hill, the ranch headquarters came into view below, nestled in a protected valley alongside a creek lined with ancient oaks. "It's beautiful," Delilah breathed, taking in the whitewashed stone house with its red roof, the well-maintained outbuildings, the cattle grazing peacefully in distant pastures. "It's home," Ronan said simply, a note of pride in his voice, "or the closest I've found to one." As they approached, activity erupted from the main house. A gray-haired woman emerged onto the porch, followed by a younger man who hurried to help with the wagon. "Mrs. Gunderson and her son Ali," Ronan explained. "Mrs. G runs the household, and Ali helps with the books when he's not teaching at the school in town." Delilah was welcomed with genuine warmth by Mrs. Gunderson, who had prepared the house for a female visitor with obvious care. Fresh flowers adorned the tables, the guest bedroom had been aired and appointed with delicate linens, and the aroma of baking filled the kitchen. "It's high time this house had a woman's appreciation," the housekeeper declared, showing Delilah around. "Mr. Blackwood's a good man but blind to certain comforts." The days that followed settled into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings found Delilah exploring the ranch with Ronan as her guide, learning about cattle breeding, water management, and the complex economics of the changing beef industry. Afternoons often included rides to neighboring properties or visits to the small town 12 miles away, where Ronan was clearly respected as a fair employer and honest businessman. Evenings were her favorite quiet dinners, followed by conversation before the fireplace, sometimes with Mrs. Gunderson joining them, often just the two of them sharing thoughts and dreams as the December winds whistled outside. On Christmas Eve, with a rare Texas snow falling gently outside, Ronan asked Delilah to walk with him after dinner. He led her to the barn, where a lantern illuminated a beautiful chestnut mare with a red ribbon tied to her bridle. "She's yours," he said softly. "I know you're an excellent rider. I saw that in Dakota. Every ranch woman needs her own horse." Delilah stroked the mare's velvet nose, momentarily speechless. "She's magnificent." "But Ronan, I can't accept." "You can," he interrupted gently. "Not as payment or obligation, but as a gift freely given. She was bred here on the Rocking Bee, descended from my first good stock. Her name is Promise." The significance wasn't lost on Delilah. A beautiful name for a beautiful animal. "I thought it fitting." He stepped closer, his expression serious in the lantern light. "I've been thinking about promises lately, the ones we make to others and the ones we make to ourselves." Her heart quickened. "What promises have you been considering?" "I promised myself long ago that I would build something meaningful with my life, something that would outlast me." His eyes held hers. "But lately I've realized that land and cattle aren't enough to fulfill that promise. Not without someone to share it with." Delilah's breath caught as he took her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to stay now," he continued. "You have responsibilities in Dakota, family who need you, but I am asking if you might consider in time making a life here, with me. Are you proposing?" She whispered, inelegantly perhaps. A smile tugged at his mouth. I should have waited for a more romantic moment, not standing in a barn on Christmas Eve. I can't imagine a more perfect moment, Delilah said truthfully. The scent of hay and horses, the soft nickering of promise beside them, the snow falling beyond the barn door, it was real, unadorned, honest, like Ronan himself. I love you, Delilah Hayes, he said simply. I think I began falling the moment I saw you on those courthouse steps, brave despite your tears. I'd like to spend my life making sure you have more reasons for joy than sorrow. Tears welled in her eyes, but these were so different from the desperate ones he'd witnessed months ago. I love you too, she whispered. But my family would be welcome here, all of them. There's room in the house, work on the ranch, a good school in town. He squeezed her hands. Or we could split our time between Texas and Dakota if that's what you prefer. We'll find a way to make it work. The generosity of his offer to include her entire family, to consider dividing his time between ranches thousands of miles apart, told Delilah everything she needed to know about the man before her. Yes, she said, the word emerging with absolute certainty. Yes, I'll marry you, Ronan Blackwood. His kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that had been building through weeks of letters and days of proximity. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Promise nudged them impatiently with her nose, as if approving the arrangement that would bring her new mistress permanently to Texas. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, with the rare snow glittering across the Texas landscape. Delilah woke early, slipping from her guest room to the kitchen where she surprised Mrs. Gunderson by already being dressed and eager to help with the holiday preparations. "Can't sleep?" the older woman asked knowingly. "Special days have a way of making a person restless." "It's more than Christmas making me restless," Delilah admitted, accepting the coffee Mrs. Gunderson offered. "Ronan asked me to marry him last night." The housekeeper's face lit with genuine pleasure. "Well, it's about time." "And you said yes, I hope, or I'll have to have words with you, young lady," Delilah laughed. "I said yes. Thank the Lord," Mrs. Gunderson declared, wiping her hands on her apron. "That man's been alone too long, needs someone to remind him there's more to life than cattle and contracts." She eyed Delilah appraisingly. "You're made of strong stuff, I can tell. You'll do well here." The older woman's approval meant more than Delilah had expected. "I hope so. There's much to learn about ranching." "Ranching's the easy part," Mrs. Gunderson said with surprising frankness. "It's loving a man like Ronan Blackwood that takes real courage." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Gunderson's expression softened. "He carries old wounds, that one, not just from losing his parents young, though that's part of it. There's something from the war years that haunts him still. He never speaks of it, but sometimes I hear him pacing at night when the memories come." Delilah thought of the careful way Ronan had avoided discussing the period between his parents' deaths and his start in the cattle business. There was a gap there, years unaccounted for in his stories. "He'll tell me when he's ready," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I believe he will." Mrs. Gunderson patted her hand. "Now let's make this a Christmas worthy of a new engagement." The day unfolded in a haze of happiness. Ronan formally announced their engagement to the household staff and the handful of ranch hands who hadn't gone to town for the holiday. A special dinner was served in the main dining room, complete with a roast turkey, Mrs. Gunderson's famous cranberry sauce, and a Christmas pudding that had been aging since September. Afterward, gathered around the fire in the main room, Ronan presented Delilah with a small velvet box. Inside nestled a ring, not the flashy diamond she might have expected from a successful rancher, but a delicate band of gold set with a perfect pearl surrounded by tiny sapphires. "It was my mother's," Ronan explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The only thing of hers I managed to keep through difficult times. It's beautiful," Delilah said softly, touched by the significance of the gift. "I'll treasure it always." Later, as they walked alone on the porch under a canopy of Texas stars, Delilah gathered her courage to ask the question that had lingered since her conversation with Mrs. Gunderson. "Ronan, what happened during the war years? You've never spoken of that time." He stiffened slightly beside her, and for a moment she feared she had broken something precious between them. Then he sighed, his breath visible in the cold night air. "It's not a pretty story," he said quietly, "and not one for Christmas night. But it's part of you," she replied. "And I want to know all of you, the dark parts as well as the light." He led her to a bench sheltered from the wind, his face half hidden in shadow. "I was 17 when the war broke out. My parents were already gone, father to pneumonia, mother to grief shortly after. I was working a small cattle operation near San Antonio, just a hired hand with nowhere else to go." Delilah listened silently as he described joining the Confederate cavalry, not out of political conviction, but because Texas was his home and most of the men he knew were going. He fought for 3 years, rising to sergeant before being captured at the Battle of Nashville in late 1864. The prisoner camp was. He paused, searching for words. It was a place where humanity went to die. Cold, disease, starvation. Men turned on each other for scraps of food, for slightly warmer spots to sleep. His voice had gone flat, emotionless, a tone Delilah recognized as self-protection. "You don't have to tell me more," she said gently, taking his hand. "I do, though." His fingers tightened around hers. "Because what happened there shapes how I see the world, how I run this ranch, why I stopped at that courthouse when I saw you crying." He told her how he'd nearly died of typhoid in the camp, saved only by the unexpected kindness of a Union doctor who shouldn't have wasted medicine on an enemy soldier. How after the war, he'd returned to Texas to find the cattle industry in chaos, with thousands of unbranded longhorns roaming the open range. "I started with nothing," he said. "Rounded up strays, established a small herd, hired on with bigger outfits to learn the business from the ground up. The first time I drove cattle to Kansas, I was so thin the trail boss almost turned me away, thought I wouldn't last the journey." Delilah could picture it, a young Ronan, hollowed by war and hunger, determined to rebuild his life from nothing. "When I saw you on those courthouse steps," he continued, "something in me recognized the desperation in your eyes. I've been there, the place where you're one piece of bad luck away from losing everything. So you helped us out of empathy," she asked, trying to understand, at first. His expression softened as he looked at her. "But then I got to know you, your strength, your devotion to your family, the grace with which you faced hardship, and empathy became admiration, and admiration became something deeper." He traced her cheek with gentle fingers. "I never expected to find you, Delilah Hayes. Never thought I'd want to build a life with someone after seeing how quickly everything can be taken away. Yet here we are," she whispered. "Here we are," he agreed, drawing her close, "making promises under Texas stars." The remainder of Delilah's visit passed in a flurry of activity as they began planning their shared future. Letters were dispatched to Dakota Territory announcing their engagement, with detailed proposals for relocating the Hayes family to Texas in the spring. Ronan arranged for improvements to the main house, including the addition of rooms suitable for Thomas and the children. When January arrived and Delilah's departure date loomed, she found herself torn between excitement to share her news with her family and reluctance to leave the man she'd grown to love more deeply with each passing day. 3 months, Ronan promised as they stood on the Austin platform, his hands warm around hers despite the winter chill. "Once the spring cattle work is under control, I'll come north with enough men and wagons to move your whole family comfortably." 3 months, she echoed, memorizing his face, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, the determined set of his jaw, the tenderness in his gaze that seemed reserved for her alone. Their goodbye kiss held the certainty of reunion rather than the pain of true separation. As the train pulled away, Delilah watched him standing tall on the platform, hat raised in farewell, until distance claimed him from her sight. The journey north gave her time to reflect on the extraordinary turn her life had taken since that desperate day outside the Cottonwood Springs courthouse. From a woman with no options to a bride-to-be with a future secured not by charity or obligation, but by a love that had grown naturally from respect and shared values. When she finally arrived home, the Hayes homestead looked smaller somehow, more fragile against the vast Dakota prairie. Thomas and the children rushed to meet the wagon that brought her from town, their faces alight with questions about Texas and Ronan, and the engagement they'd learned of by letter. That night after the children were asleep, Thomas sat with Delilah by the fire, studying her face in the flickering light. "You look different," he observed. "Settled in yourself somehow." "I am," she acknowledged. "I never expected this, Papa. Never thought I'd find someone who sees your worth," he finished gently. "I always knew someone would someday, though I admit I didn't expect him to ride into our lives quite so dramatically." They laughed together, remembering Ronan's first appearance and Thomas's initial suspicion of the stranger's motives. "Are you certain about moving to Texas?" Delilah asked. "It's a long way from everything you know." Thomas gazed into the fire. "This land has taken more from us than it's given. Your mother's buried here, it's true, but she'd want us to go where the children can thrive." He patted her hand. "Besides, this old man wouldn't mind spending his remaining years somewhere the winters don't freeze the marrow in your bones." The 3 months until Ronan's arrival passed both too quickly and too slowly. Delilah and her family prepared for the momentous change, selling livestock they couldn't take, packing treasured possessions, saying goodbye to neighbors who had become friends through shared hardship. Henry Caldwell made one final attempt to claim their land, offering a sum that seemed generous until Thomas calculated the true value of the wheat field now that Ronan's improvements had proven successful. The offer was politely refused, and the Hayes property was instead sold to a consortium of local farmers who had banded together after witnessing the power of cooperation during the previous summer's community harvest. When Ronan arrived in late April with 3 wagons and 6 skilled hands, the transformation in him was evident to everyone. The reserved cattleman who had first ridden into their lives now greeted Thomas with the warmth of a son, tossed Sarah high in the air to hear her laugh, and discussed cattle breeding with Daniel as if the boy were a partner rather than a child. With Delilah, he was both respectful and clearly besotted, drawing knowing smiles from neighbors who gathered to wish the family well on their journey south. Their wedding took place 2 days after his arrival, a simple ceremony in the Cottonwood Springs Church, where Delilah's mother had once played the organ for Sunday services. The bride wore a new dress of sky blue silk, a gift from Ronan sent ahead for the occasion, and carried wildflowers gathered by Sarah from the prairie that morning. The small church overflowed with well-wishers, including several families who had benefited from Ronan's assistance during the previous summer's harvest. Even Judge Wilson attended, pulling Ronan aside afterward to express his admiration for how a chance encounter outside his courthouse had led to such a fortunate union. "Not chance," Ronan corrected politely. "Providence." The journey to Texas became a honeymoon of sorts, with Ronan and Delilah sharing a wagon while Thomas traveled with the children. Each night's camp brought new landscapes to appreciate, new challenges to overcome together, and the growing certainty that their partnership was built on the sturdy foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. By the time they crossed into Texas, Delilah felt as though she'd lived a lifetime since leaving Dakota. The woman who returned to the Rocking Bee Ranch bore little resemblance to the timid visitor who had arrived 6 months earlier. This Delilah rode beside her husband with confidence, already planning improvements to the main house, discussing water management strategies for the southern pastures, and envisioning the school where Sarah and Daniel would soon continue their education. Their arrival at the ranch was marked by celebration. Mrs. Gunderson had prepared a feast, the bunkhouse was festooned with ribbons and lanterns, and the ranch hands had composed a surprisingly tuneful song to welcome their boss's new bride and family. As twilight settled over the land that would now be her home, Delilah stood with Ronan on the wide porch, his arm around her waist while they watched Thomas supervising the children's exploration of the barn. "Happy?" Ronan asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," she assured him. "Though I still sometimes wonder what made you stop that day. Of all the courthouses in all the frontier towns, why that one?" He considered the question seriously. "I've asked myself the same thing. I wasn't planning to stop in Cottonwood Springs at all, was just passing through on my way north." "So what changed your mind?" "Honestly, I saw a young woman crying alone on the steps and everyone walking past as if she were invisible. His expression grew thoughtful. "I've been invisible before. It's a terrible feeling." Delilah leaned into his embrace, grateful beyond words for the man who had seen her when no one else would. "Well, I see you, Ronan Blackwood. All of you, the cattleman, the businessman, the man who stops for strangers in distress." "And I see you, Delilah Blackwood," he returned, the new name still sounding wonderful on his lips. The woman brave enough to build a life with a man she met under the strangest of circumstances. As the Texas stars emerged overhead, Delilah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From desperate tears on courthouse steps to profound joy on a ranch porch, their story had unfolded in ways neither could have imagined that summer day when a cowboy found her outside the courthouse, paid her father's fine, and held her as she cried. The debt that had first connected them had been transformed into something far more valuable, a bond formed not from obligation, but from choice, a love that had grown naturally in the fertile ground of respect and shared dreams, a partnership strong enough to weather whatever challenges the frontier might bring. And in the years that followed, as the rocking bee prospered under their joint stewardship, as children joined their family, first a son with Ronan's thoughtful eyes, then twin daughters with Delilah's quiet determination, the story of their beginning became family legend. Told and retold as testament to the unexpected ways love finds its home on the wild frontier. Thomas Hayes lived to see his grandchildren grow, finding renewed purpose in teaching them the skills he'd brought west from Pennsylvania. Daniel became Ronan's right hand in the cattle operation, eventually managing his own section of the expanding ranch. Sarah discovered a talent for numbers, keeping the ranch books with precision that impressed even the bankers in Austin. And Delilah and Ronan, they built something that would indeed outlast them, not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of compassion that extended far beyond their property lines. Following Ronan's example, they made a practice of offering second chances to those in need, whether struggling neighbors, orphaned children, or ranch hands down on their luck. Each year on their anniversary, they would sit together on the porch as evening fell, marveling at the unlikely path that had brought them together, and the life they had built from what began as a simple act of kindness outside a frontier courthouse. "Best investment I ever made," Ronan would say, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at his wife, and Delilah, thinking of all they had created together, would always reply, "For both of us, my love, for both of us."